I wanted to talk a little bit about the importance of honoring our ancestors in psychotherapy. In a lot of my research, reading, and interaction with indigenous healing traditions, there's a big, how should I say, focal point about paying homage to ancestors or being in touch with the ancestors, which unfortunately is often categorized as ancestor worship, which is not always that way. But a lot of healers, indigenous healers, they call on the knowledge, the spirit of the elders to help guide them, to give them information to make the right decisions, and to help the patient heal. What I've noticed lately, and again, this I'm taking 100% responsibility for this perception because it is mine alone, but I've noticed that last few years, last decade or two, it just seems that in psychotherapy, the lure of something new, the shiny new object, seems to get our attention, and we don't pay as much attention to the contributions of our ancestors, the people who came before us to kind of, who were trailblazers to make this path that the rest of us are walking on. It is not uncommon, at least again in my perception, that a lot of new therapies, because there's a lot of new therapies out there, are really just reinventing the wheel. Or they'll do something like this particular therapy I was seeing a flyer for, so they took a little bit of satir and a little bit of gestalt and a little bit of something, kind of meld them together, and then they have a new name for it, and of course a 3-tier training program for only $3,500 each. Anyway, we seem to be more obsessed with getting what's new and what's the latest information. And I'm also seeing a problem with new graduates out of school. It's like they don't have a real connection to people who started this field. They may know about Freud and Albert Ellis and those people, but it's a passing knowledge. It's not a really in-depth connection to our ancestors. So my point of this video is to just say, let's go back in time. Doesn't mean we have to like everything that our therapeutic ancestors did, but there's some real gold there. There's some real foundation. And to keep ourselves humble. All of us are standing on the shoulders of giants. And when we pretend those giants didn't exist, or we just maybe are a little less forthcoming about where we get our information in order to elevate ourselves, that we're something special, I think that doesn't help the field. I think if we're growing in levels, then we need to honor these levels and have that good in-depth foundation. And part of that is recognizing our ancestors, the people who started these theories, techniques, therapies on which we are now building our foundations, and then hopefully the next couple of generations will be building upon us and refining and hopefully becoming more effective and better healers. So I'm going to just share with you a few of the ancestors who I am totally indebted to, and to honor their memory and talk just briefly about each one. And by the way, I'll be leaving out some people just due to memory, and I will also there's some people still around that I'm not going to mention because they're still around, and so I want to focus on these people who really came the early days that inspired me. The first, of course, anyone who knows me, at the top of the list is the brilliant psychiatrist Dr. Milton Erickson. And I'm not going to go into a long dialogue about Erickson. There's so many other places you can find out about Erickson. And if I could mention, My book, Potential Not Pathology, is one of them. But Dr. Erickson is just this giant among amazing healers in the psychotherapeutic tradition. We have to look at the time period when Erickson was coming out in the 40s and 50s. People were so obsessed with going always to the childhood, focusing on client deficits, seeing an individual as a pattern of unconscious conflicts, pulling them apart. And Erickson came with a more common sense and uncommon sense toward therapy that just shook everything up. I remember one of his students told me that some of the psychiatrists that he knew thought that Erickson was the one who'd gone through a psychotic break, not just his patients, because what he was doing was so groundbreaking. So what I get from Dr. Erickson, I want to honor just his creativity, his willingness to be different, his intuitive knowing that what he was doing was going to work, his ability to join with each person and see each person, each client, as a unique individual, that you're creating a theory and a technique for the client as you're interacting with the client. Now, this is something that our modern research, like the common factors, are showing us, that if we treat each client as an individual, we're bound to have better success. So I want to thank Dr. Erickson and tell him I appreciate all he did. Other people around this time period, the wonderful giants at the MRI, the Mental Research Institute, Gregory Bateson, I mean, what a renaissance man, Don Jackson, Jay Haley, Paul Wasselwick, Bill Fry, John Weakland, all these people who came together to start seeing interaction, an interaction-focused therapy. Was more important than psychological archaeology of the past and seeing people in these limited terms, and seeing that we're constantly interacting, and when we change the way that we interact, amazing things can happen. I mean, there's so much to talk about with them, but their way they viewed things was just foundationally fundamental to how I work, and I learn from them still. I was just reading a little article about Don Jackson the other day, because I don't know enough about our forefathers and foremothers, and I need to know more. Speaking of foremothers, one of my absolute favorite therapists of all time, Virginia Satir, who showed that interaction is crucial, and having an experience in therapy is so important. An experience of connection, an experience of love, an experience of the goodness, of the connection that we all can have. And she mostly worked with families, but how families can, and sculpting and reshaping them in the session. And paying more attention to what's happening in the interaction rather than always what's in the past. Another person was Carl Whitaker, who again is kind of lumped into the family therapy and was a family therapist. But here's a guy who was so tied into his own intuition, as he put it, his own craziness, that whatever came to his mind within reason, it just came out, sometimes without reason, to give clients an experience, to push them into certain directions, to normalize things that they thought were crazy, to make crazy things that they thought were normal, and to just really this dynamic interplay, this improvisational dance he did with his clients. They're controversial in some cases, but anyone who ever watched some of his work or read it, he could be incredibly effective. And he's the one who I think made the comment that he felt he had a theory that psychological psychotherapy theories were a hindrance. So his theory was that theories could be a hindrance, and to be more alive and genuine and dynamic. Coming off all of those, we're tying into like the cybernetic epistemology thinkers that profoundly influence and continue to. The great Umberto Maturana, Francisco Varela, these biologists from Chile who showed us that how animals perceive things are based on the structure that they have, and that we can only take in information that fits our structure. And then it starts for us to question, in an interactive therapy session, what we're perceiving might not be what is. It's only what our structure, can perceive. So it's important that therapists aren't hung up on strict ideas about treatment, strict ideas about what the truth is. Then you add in people like Brad Keeney, who was an active therapist and putting these things into practice. Have you ever watched any video or read Brad's books? They're very inspiring, very intriguing. Heinz von Forrester, who was this polymath, this great physicist, who really pushed us to go, okay, what really is real? And just when you think that, we have it figured out, he'd kind of tweak it a little bit. Oh, we're observing this, so we're seeing that. Well, what about the observer? We're a part of this. So to think that we don't affect what we're a part of, it's maybe a little naive sometimes, and it gives us a better perspective. So those four mothers are very fundamental. People outside, I just want to mention people who outside therapy, still a tremendous impact. I look at them as ancestors and inspirations. Lao Tzu and Zhuangzi, leaders in the idea of Taoism. Lao Tzu is considered the father of Taoism. His book Tao Te Ching, where he talked about balancing opposites. I think that's so fundamental because therapists get stuck into, as like I talked about in another video, this idea of there's a problem and there's not a problem. And Lao Tzu's kind of indirectly said when we blur the distinction between the two, then everything's balanced and we have this complementary flow. Zhuangzi, a Taoist who was all on board of that, but how he embodied it, this crazy wisdom to say crazy things, to do things that people don't expect, to create shifts and changes in how they processed information and how they look at this world, this so-called reality. Alan Watts, the guru of the 50s, 60s, and 70s, where he was really kind of an early purveyor of Zen Buddhism and Taoism and all these Eastern traditions, and yet wrapping them in a language that Westerners could understand, and then applying it to psychology, Western psychology, and see where their common threads were. Joseph Campbell, the great mythologist, the person who taught us about the archetypes, the hero's journey, and that we're all living a mythical life, using those idea of Jung's archetypes, how that fits in to our life. And when we look at our life as a great mythic journey, even the hardships become steps on the path to something greater, some new insight, some new experience. Alfred Korzybski, the founder of General Semantics, who taught us that from a Western perspective that words are not the things. He's famous for the map is not the territory. And it's true. We use language to create our reality, and Korzybski said, what if we saw things without language and realized when we could separate those, then we have more choices. The great Chilean artist, director, writer Alejandro Jodorowsky, who's famous for these psychedelic movies like El Topo and Holy Mountain, but a profound thinker about healing and magical interactions. His work on psychomagic and metagenealogy really inspired the way I do rituals and helped me understand some of the other cultures I've studied and interacted with about how they do rituals and why that's important and how it can be profoundly transformational in healing for people. And lastly, and probably most importantly, the Marx Brothers. I love the Marx Brothers. When I was a kid, I always watched the Marx Brothers and still do. A couple weeks ago, I watched Night at the Opera, one of their best. The reason I list the Marx Brothers is here is a group of men who not only were geniuses in so many ways, but absurdity, just constant absurdity of life they would see. And then they'd create these absurd conditions that we're laughing at, and we don't understand why we're laughing at it. And it pokes fun at authority, and yet at the same time brings in so many different elements, to make our head go, well, I don't know, what am I seeing? And yet laughing the whole time. The ability to move into a situation and you think a situation's one way and then they come in and move it to something totally different. I think that's very valuable for a therapist to see. And I would love to see Marx Brothers films included in graduate training programs. I know some people will have an issue with that, but they're also boring. So there you go. I want to leave you with something. Since I'm honoring my therapist ancestors, I think try this. I did this one time, and I think it's really profound if you'll have the right frame of mind. Get a piece of paper and take pictures off the internet or wherever of therapists who have inspired you. I did this. I took pictures off the internet of therapists who inspired me, who passed on or still living, because they're still living. I'm still learning. And I put them on a piece of paper, like in a flow, almost like a flow chart, if you will, from early to more modern. And then I left a space at the end of the page. And I took a picture of myself. And I put it right on there. Because I wanted to see that I was a part of this tradition. And to get my mindset, hey, they've given you this. You have a responsibility to continue. And you know what's really funny is as I'm talking about this, it just pops in my head that when I did that, I had it on my office, on my door, on my file cabinet, side of my file cabinet. And one day I looked over, and there's a couple of people who were on that paper that at the time I didn't even know, I didn't have any connection with. And they've honored me by endorsing my work and supporting me, and some of us have become friends. And maybe somewhere that started a process unconsciously for me to connect more with those that are still here and continue to learn. If you'd like to leave your heroes, your ancestors that you'd like to honor, please do. But let's not forget the past. And let's honor the past as we move forward in the future.